Hello and welcome to the Over and Back Classic NBA podcast. I am Jason, and with me as usual is Rich. Hello, Rich.
How's it going, Jason?
Doing well. It's exciting times here as we are getting close to another MVP being decided in the NBA. Probably going to be James Harden, although some of the candidates have emerged that at least people are trying to pretend have a chance. So we'll see how it goes, of course. But there's nothing wrong with being number two, even if James Harden is the winner. Yeah, whoever's number two, not too bad.
No. Sometimes maybe somewhere down the line in an NBA history podcast, we'll shine a spotlight on whoever finished number two in the MVP. I don't know when that's going to happen, but at some point I'm sure it will. So if you finish second, it's not the worst thing in the world. And you know what, Jason? That's actually not the worst idea for a show in the world. We should maybe do that. You want to do that?
All right, let's go and do it.
I don't know what we're going to talk about, but screw it. Delete those notes. Let's talk about the number two MVP vote without any notes or anything, and no preparation, whatever. Yeah, that's obviously the name of the show.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Yeah, nothing can go
wrong.
Crack
our knuckles and get going. All right.
All right. So before we get into that, I'll give us a little time to prepare. I'll stall by talking a little bit about some other things.
Please.
Yeah.
I got a lot of Wikipedia to do here, but yeah, go ahead. I got.
Okay. All right.
I'm already up to Dave Cowens, 1975, so we're doing pretty good here.
Nice.
So
wow.
we're going quickly, so good.
You work fast, yeah. So there are one thing that has always puzzled me a little bit is that the NBA did not have an MVP from 50 to 56, and that just sort of seems like a weird thing for a league to not award, especially since they started awarding the Rookie of the Year in 53. So they decided, hey, we'll have a Rookie of the Year, but not an MVP until 56. So I delved a bit into the past on that, tried to find out if there was a particular reason why they never had one. The BAA didn't have one in the 3 years before the leagues merged, but the NBL did have one. So there was at least a tradition of there being an MVP in one of the leagues. So it was a little bit odd. And I couldn't really find a reason to why that happened. But there were some alternative MVP awards that were selected, and we're going to shine a light on those a little bit as we go through the process of talking about the runner-up. So obviously there's the NBA MVP, which was selected by the players until 1980, and then by basketball writers and broadcasters from 81 until now. And then there was something called the Sam Davis Memorial Award. Could not figure out who Sam Davis was. If anybody happens
just a guy
to
that
know,
liked.
Yeah.
He was a member of the dinner club that that founded this. I have no clue. Yeah, I don't know who Sam Davis is. But.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Sammy Davis. I know who Sammy Davis is, but I don't know who Sam Davis is.
Obviously, his father, I'm sure. So.
Well, probably, yeah. Obviously, Sammy Davis Jr. That makes sense. So, anyway, this was selected by the Metropolitan Basketball Writers Association from 1950 to about 75. It's a little bit unclear. But it kind of seems like it might have been the de facto NBA MVP until the league started awarding its own award. I'm not really, again, clear on that. But they did have some prestige. The MBWA, they were the founders of the NIT, and its awards were reported on in the New York Times up through at least the early 70s. So there was clearly some prestige, in New York, if not nationally. So there was also a Sporting News MVP or Player of the Year. I think it was called both. Starting in 59, Basketball Digest Player of the Year from about 77 to 2003-ish. And then the United States Basketball Writers MVP, which basically emulated the NBA MVP except for one season, which we'll get into. And then, of course, more recently, the Players Association Players Voice Award MVP, which started in 2015. So there you go, Rich. Hopefully I bought you enough time to have done the research for the show.
Yes, we're all done. We got it up. We got all the way up till 2017. So congratulations to us for doing that. But yeah, it's very strange how there wasn't necessarily an MVP. And you look back at other sports, and it's not without precedent. Like, baseball, they started their MVP technically in 1911 with the Chalmers Award, which was just like the Chalmers Automobile Company. And this is kind of a famous one as well, where, like Ty Cobb and Knapp, I forgot, LaJoy, I don't even know how to pronounce his layaway. I don't know how the fellow pronounce his name. I never do. But where they were like battling over like a Chalmers automobile car, and that was like basically whoever had the highest batting average. And then that sort of evolved into who people thought were the most valuable. A committee of baseball writers would find out who were the most valuable. But by 1914, that award was done because the Chalmers automobile said, well, this isn't selling any cars, so screw this. We're done. And it was gone then. Like, so it was an award for a little while. People cared about it, thought about it. And then it really went away until in 1922, they brought back the league awards. But that was kind of weird too, because then there was an American League and National League, and obviously they were kind of operating in different categories. The American League would name an MVP MVP, but the National League wouldn't, and then some years they would both. It was strange, and it didn't really quite come all the way together until like 1931, and that's when the Baseball Writers Association decided, okay, let's have this Most Valuable Player award and vote on it as among writers or whatever. And that's obviously the award that's been is still used to this day. But what's weird about that is, in the NBA's context, is it's understandable that in 1910 maybe they didn't think about this in Major League Baseball or whatever. But we're talking about the NBA should have already figured out, hey, this MVP thing is like something that people care about. Why don't we have one of these? Particularly if you're going to give away other awards. So like it's not without precedent for the beginning of a league not to quite have that. But I don't know that it's quite comparable, like 1911 to the mid 50s. It's a little harder to organize people and get everything together, in 1911 than it would have been in the 50s, or we're talking even to mid to late 50s until we really got any sort of MVP award, and they had seen the other pro leagues do it, so it wasn't like this unfounded or completely random thing that the NBA was like, aha, I got it, let's, the best player in the league, we'll give him an award. Like it was done in other leagues. So why the NBA didn't just roll out with it right away is kind of perplexing. I'm not quite entirely sure why.
Yeah, and the NFL had first version of it was like in the 30s, and then they basically settled in on the current MVP award, which is actually given out by the AP in '57. So, and which is now the official league award, although it wasn't that for a long time. But it is. It is odd, I guess, that the fact that the tradition of the sport already had one. I guess it's one example where the BAA got its way in the merger, perhaps. But nevertheless, it's interesting, and we'll kind of reference it, especially when it differs from what the official line was for the various awards. But just want to bring those up at the top of the show, so when we discuss them, you'll know what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
So first we got pitcher Paul Arizin, who was runner-up in 1956. He never won an MVP, although perhaps he would have or if it had existed early on, because he was one of the better players of the early 50s. And what can you tell us about pitching Paul?
Yeah, so Paul Arizin in 1956 obviously finished second. The actual winner that year was Bob Pettit. In terms of win shares, Bob Pettit was number one in win shares, so Paul Arizin probably didn't have a case above Bob Pettit, but there's definitely some things that could be said about it. Paul Arizin, he averaged 24.2 points per game, 7.5 rebounds per game on the NBA champion Philadelphia Warriors. Bob Pettit, he probably did earn the award, though, for what it's worth. I mean, yes, his team only finished 33 and 39 in the regular season, but he was a monster. He averaged 25.7 points per game, 16.2 rebounds per game. So this is a case where, there's a very good case that Paul Arizin could have won it, but it seems like Pettit was definitely a good choice. But kind of interesting in that time. Nowadays we see so many people are so obsessed with what was the regular season record? Are they in the playoffs? Are they the best team in the league? Well, how can you be the most valuable if your team's not an elite team? And it's like Bob Pettit's just amazing on a team that's like okay, and he gets the award. Nobody, I'm sure, I don't know if people got upset at this time when they did either. But a little bit about Paul Arizin too before we kind of move on. He played 6 more seasons in the league, and then he retired basically at the top of his game because he didn't want to move to San Francisco. And this was in the days where it was like that was a rational decision. Hey, I don't want to move my family all the way to San Francisco, for basketball. I'm good. I'll stay here or whatever, which is pretty interesting though. But so at the time of his retirement, no player had retired from the game with a higher scoring average than Arizin at 21.9. That's what he had in his final season. So definitely still in the peak of his power. Still definitely probably could have played for a few more years. Didn't want to go to San Francisco, but he played in a total of 10 NBA All-Star games. He was the 1952 NBA All-Star Game MVP. Also All-NBA First Team in 1952, 56, and 57. Interestingly enough, and we have talked about this on a show before, that after he retired from the NBA, and this is one of my greatest fun facts ever, is that Arizin, he played 3 seasons with the Camden Bullets of the Eastern Professional Basketball League and won the 1964 title there. So pretty good. And as you had sort of alluded to, the Sam Davis Award, Arizin won the 1952 Sam Davis Award from the Metropolitan Sports Writers Group, and then Pettit won it in 1956. So Pettit won both of the awards. Arizin did get a Sam Davis Award in 1952, and sort of as you mentioned in the lead-in, had the award been around a little bit earlier, there's a good chance that Arizin probably does pick up maybe 1, maybe 2 MVPs in his career earlier. But yeah, the problem is he comes in 1956, and that's kind of the first year, and he's sort of a runner-up immediately, and never really gets over to that hump, and never does win his own MVP. But finished second in 1956, so not bad.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and just worth noting, for the Sam Davis Award winners before the NBA MVP, Mikan won it in 51. Arizin, as we mentioned, won it in 52. Cousy won it in 53. Neil Johnston won it in 54, and then Cousy won it again in 55. I was kind of surprised that Mikan stopped winning it after 51 because he was still pretty dominant in 52 and 53. 54 he slowed down a little bit, but was still kind of even with Neil Johnston. That was kind of a toss-up there. But anyway, just for the record, I thought thought that was interesting since we don't have an official MVP. That's the best consensus of the time. So, our next runners-up is Bob Pettit in 57 and 61. And he won 2 MVPs in his career, 56, as we mentioned, and 59. And that year, 57 was Cousy, who, of course, the Celtics, they won the division and their first NBA championship, beginning the Bill Russell dynasty, when Russell was less acclaimed as a player, as a rookie. And Pettit Hawks again finished 500 below the regular season, but they made it all the way to the NBA Finals, which is kind of a trend for the team, where they would be a little bit mediocre in the regular season and then would have a valiant playoff run. That year, he averaged 24.7 points per game, 14.6 rebounds per game, but was actually in third shares among those who got MVP votes. Schayes and Arizin were both ahead of him. He did lead in win shares for 48, though, so certainly, would have been a deserving winner. Was deserving runner up. And in 61, Bill Russell was the winner there, and not surprisingly, they won the NBA title there. That year, the Hawks had a great regular season, but fell in the NBA Finals to of course, the Celtics.
Yeah,
and go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, and that year, Pettit has a really good case to win MVP. I mean, he's got 14.9 win shares, 0.237 win shares per 48. But he wasn't the best in the league because old Wilt Chamberlain at 24 had 18.8 win shares and averaged 38.4 points per game and 27.2 rebounds per game. So unfortunately, your really good, spectacular season is kind of dwarfed by the fact that Wilt Chamberlain is very good, and Bill Russell's also very good and also winning titles. So definitely a rough time for Pettit, and he's a guy that's kind of lost to history in some ways. And I don't know necessarily that I would say that, but I don't know if he's necessarily brought up a lot as one of the NBA's early elites, but only because you have Wilt, who's obviously jumping off the page in terms of statistics, and then Russell and the Celtics, who are obviously winning, every single title. But Pettit obviously got his one and whatnot, and was solid enough. But yeah, he's kind of lost the time because those other two dudes are just so elite and really all time legends.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I mean, he was really great, and those Hawks teams, we talked about those. Those teams were, they made 4 out of 5 finals and won, of course, 58 championship. But and Pettit, he was still effective into the mid 60s as the league evolved a lot, and not just Russell and Chamberlain, but Oscar Robertson, Elgin Baylor, all those guys were really were becoming superstars and were established themselves as the best in the league. And Pettit didn't quite match that, but he was really, really excellent for quite a long time.
Sure, and I mentioned Wilt Chamberlain a little bit earlier. He was obviously upset because he also did not win MVP that year. Bill Russell won it, so then the next year he decided to average 50.4 points per game, which was pretty good, but he was still second in MVP. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. So unfortunately, you can average over 50, you can have 100-point games, you can do incredible stuff, but you're not the MVP yet, sir. But we'll talk about that here in a little bit. So
yeah. So next we go to Dolph Schayes in 1958, another guy who never won the MVP. He did win the Sam Davis Award in 58, and this was really the only year that he got serious MVP consideration. He probably would have had it existed before 56. In fact, he was top 4 in PER from 52 to 55. And he also made 5 NBA first teams during that time, back when they were positionless. He was definitely considered a top 5 player. In 58, he averaged 24.9 points per game, which is career high and second in the league, was 4th in the league in rebounding, and led the league in free throw percentage. He was 29 at this point, was second in the league in both PER and win shares for 48. So the Nationals had been kind of a 500-ish team since winning the title in 55, but as they turned over a little bit, it was Schayes and Red Kerr who were left in prominent roles, and they improved to 41 and 31. So that would kind of explain why he got more attention, and the fact that, again, he did average some career highs there. It wasn't like he was exceptionally better than he previously been, but it was enough of a bump that he obviously got the attention he got.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then our next runner-ups are or runners-up, I guess, are Bill Russell, who was runner-up in 59 and 60, and then Wilt Chamberlain in 62 and 64. I think we didn't really delve too deeply into this because we've talked about Russell and Chamberlain a whole lot in the show, so there's not a whole lot more that we're going to necessarily add here. Obviously, the one that really stands out is Chamberlain 62, where he, of course, averaged 50 points per game. That was also the year where where Oscar Robertson averaged triple-double, two marvelous, exceptional seasons. But for whatever reason, probably the reason was because they were the best regular season team and winning all those championships. And of course, Bill Russell was a game-changing defender and did all the things that he did. Russell won it despite having much more pedestrian statistics. So I'm willing to trust the people of the time. Obviously, I mean they knew about the stats either way, but Russell, he delivered again and again in big moments and, winning all those championships. So it's hard to argue against Russell.
No, it's if it was some other random schlup, we might be like, that guy doesn't. But it's like Bill Russell, so it's like, he probably deserved it because he's pretty good. What's interesting too about that 59 and 50 and 60, the 2 years that Russell finished second, is that had he finished first in those years, he would have had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 straight MVPs. But he finished second those 2 years in between because he wins in 58, finishes second in 59, second in 60, wins 61, wins 62, wins 63, finishes third in 64, wins 65, and then he's kind of done as he's fourth, third, and fourth, so he's not like he's done as a contender, but he's done being like the winner, the runner-up, or right out of it or whatever. But still, pretty incredible run that he could have went on there with those 2 MVP awards. But still had a pretty incredible run. Bill Russell still had a good career. I think we can officially say that tonight. So
I think so. I think it's finally been declared. I think it's finally, we've closed the history books on that. Yeah, absolutely.
Regardless of those 2 MVP runner-ups, Bill Russell still has a career he can be proud of. So that's...
Yes, yeah, exactly. Very good, Rich. I appreciate that.
I'm glad we got to that.
Another guy who's a little bit surprising that never won MVP, Elgin Baylor. In fact, his only year that he was the runner-up was a 63, and he actually did win the Sam Davis Award that year, so at least someone recognized him as the MVP. That year, he was second in the league in scoring. He was fifth in rebounding and sixth in assists. He actually had 6 seasons in which he was top 10 in the league in assists per game, which I think is not really that part of his game I never had quite realized. And he had the ball a lot, so some of that is just it's not necessarily he was the best passer in the world, but because he had a lot of chances with it, but still that's good. And he had he was second in the league in PER and fifth in Winchester 48. It was basically his last elite season statistically. He was good for another couple of years, and then he had his really serious knee injury at age 30, which he and struggled a year recovering from that before settling into pretty good until he was age 35, and then injuries kind of kept him from playing in his last 2 seasons.
Right, yeah, it's kind of an unfortunate end for him. But yeah, it was kind of weird that he never really emerged as and you look at the talent of the era and you look at some stuff, and there's definitely years where he probably had a pretty good case to at least be in the running. But yeah, he finishes third, fifth, fourth, second, as we mentioned, sixth, third, fifth, 15th. So he's in the mix kind of, but not necessarily one of the guys that's really knocking on the door of winning the MVP other than 1963. So yeah, kind of interesting there that he never does do that. So a little disappointing.
And in fairness, the only guys who won MVP during the time in which he could have realistically won it were, Chamberlain, Russell, Robertson 1 year, and then Pettit went back when Baylor was a rookie. So yeah, there was little he was just behind those guys. There's no shame in that, obviously.
No, definitely not.
So next we have Oscar Robertson, 1965. He had won it previously in 64. He would have been a fine MVP in 65 as well. He was second in the league in PER in Winchester 48, third in points per game and first in assists per game. The Royals were slightly worse than the year before, but they were still a 48 win team. But like I said, not quite as stout as the previous year. And people were giving it to that was Russell getting it back after losing it for a year after he won the 3 previous ones. So, he certainly he seems like he was definitely the right choice there. Although it was certainly, you could call it a toss up.
Yeah, I mean he's the first overall in terms of like win shares. So I guess you can make a case that way or whatever. But yeah, it's hard when there's all those other guys, and Robertson has incredible numbers this year. But there's also other guys too. Like Chamberlain has a great year that year. Jerry West has a great year that year, and it's Bill Russell. So he's always got sort of a leg up on guys. So yeah, it's a tough year. And again, it's like one of those issues that we said. Unfortunately, when Russell's in your league and Chamberlain's in your league, and now Jerry West is sort of emerging, it's going to be pretty tough to make any headway in terms of the MVP. But yeah, he would have been a fine MVP, but things happen, and thankfully we're talking about him now, so it's all good.
Things do happen, yes. Yeah. Speaking of someone who things happen to,
so Jerry West, and it's not like Jerry West to finish a runner-up at all ever in his career. I mean, this is a consummate winner, never a guy that gets to the final stretch and then just loses and is just the runner-up. But he was the runner-up in 1960, in 1970, in 1971, and in 1972. Is there any idea? Like, it's so obvious why he's such a crotchety guy, and like nobody likes him, and he hates everything, and everybody hates him. Like, wouldn't you hate everything too? It's not like he's just like okay. Like he gets to the award ceremony and then doesn't win. He gets to the championship and then doesn't win. It's got to be like, man, that's kind of a it's tough. I mean, yeah, it's cool to get there, but geez, I'd rather just kind of like be middling, not get there and then lose every time. I don't know.
Yeah, it's rough. I don't know if everybody dislikes him, but he definitely is a crotchy guy.
No, yeah, okay. Like, maybe some people like him. He's definitely crotchety though. I think I'm not taking that back. I'm not walking that way.
No, yes, but definitely yes.
He hates fun. Yeah, confirmed fun hater though. Jerry West.
There you go. I had no idea you had such strong.
I don't. I really don't. I just, everyone's always like, "Oh, he just doesn't really like fun that much." Anytime like, Golden State of mine or whatever, it's he's talking about how he's just even watching a game with him now is sort of like this. It's like terrible experience because he's just like, Steph Curry. It's like, dude, like they're gonna win 73 games. Like but like I get it. He's like, geez, I can't even win a damn MVP. I can't win a championship. I can't do anything. But yeah, so from 1962 until 66, West was in the top 5 each year for MVP voting, but never higher than second in 1966. 1970, he was back at it with 4 straight years in the top 10, with 3 straight years as runner-up, and a 6th-place finish in 1973. And if you're wondering, hey, when did Jerry West win his MVP? He never won an MVP. So for Jerry West. He did win the 1972 Sam Davis Award, which I'm sure he was very happy about. That was in the Lakers' 69-win season. And he might have won some other ones as well, but there's real tough records for 1966 and 1971. So he's a plausible winner either of those years, but we just don't have the records on it, so we're not quite sure. But as far as those runner-up seasons, I mean, he's got very good cases for those two. West, he was second, third, and sixth in win shares per 48 in those runner-up seasons. Third, first, second, and third in PR, and pretty much top 5 in points per game and assists per game all those times. Led the NBA once in each. He was behind Wilt statistically in 1966 and way behind Kareem in 1971 and 72. But in terms of a few of the other years, Willis Reed and West, they were pretty much neck and neck in 1970s number-wise. So if there was any year where it like very much probably should have gone to Jerry West, maybe 1970. But again, like you can make cases for other guys in all those years too. So it's not like Jerry West was screwed out of the title every single year or whatever. But there's cases to be made. And it's like, geez, after 4 years, just give him the damn award in like 1972. Just what, here, Jerry, just take it. You deserve it. You've had a rough go of it for a while. But Jerry West, perpetual runner-up. Perpetual bridesmaid, Jerry West. But
I mean, he got his championship that year, so I'm sure he was happy about that. And the Sam Davis.
No, he wasn't. No, remember, he wasn't happy about it.
Oh, well, that's true. Yeah,
he was just like, who cares?
Yeah,
I lost too many times before this, and it's like, all right, Jerry, come on, man, like you won it. Just be happy for like 10 minutes, and then but the strain of all the losses, like, all right.
Yeah, you're kind of making me feel bad for Jerry West at this point.
He won a hey, his GM record was quite good, so I'm sure
that was pretty good. Yeah,
so
that's a good point. Yeah,
revel in that his GM award for Jerry West. He needs a hug. Just a man that needs a hug.
He could use a hug. Yeah, it's true. Probably complain about the hug, but what are you gonna do? So next we have sort of an unusual name here. Nate Thurmond, 1967, was the runner-up to Wilt Chamberlain. Obviously Nate Thurmond was a great player, a great rebounder, and all that good stuff, and one of the better big men of his day, but never really thought of necessarily the MVP conversation. In fact, he started off as Wilt's teammate with the San Francisco Warriors, only averaged 7 points per game in his rookie year, but after Wilt had left, he emerged and was second in MVP voting, losing to Wilt. And the stats don't really see him necessarily in that case with only 7.2 win shares. He did average 18.7 points per game, 21.3 rebounds per game. But if you look at his top competitors, Wilt had 24.1 points per game, 24.2 rebounds, and 21.9 win shares, so about 3 times as many as Thurmond had. And Bill Russell also had a stronger year at advanced stance than Thurmond did. And even Oscar Robertson and Rick Barry, Thurmond's teammate, had great cases. Barry led the league in scoring that year with 35.6 points per game, 9.2 rebounds, and 14.4 win share. So yeah, and Thurmond, Barry, and the Warriors made it all the way to the NBA Finals, but lost to Wilt and the 76ers in 6 games that year. So, and there was really never a year where he merited serious MVP consideration. He was very much on the fringes. Got a handful of votes from like 70 to 74, but never was a guy who was taken serious at that level again. But interesting footnote.
Yeah, absolutely. And the guy we're talking about here, Lenny Wilkens, 1968. This is an interesting one too because he really never ever appears again. Like, so he finished second in 1968, and that's pretty much it as far as award shares. He finished 16th in 1973, but really, I mean, that barely counts. It's kind of fascinating that way too because as Wilkens MVP runner-up, he was a member of the St. Louis Hawks at that time, which is interesting. I initially thought, oh, he's probably a member of the Sonics, or he's a member of the Hawks at this time. And this is really his best statistical year to date. He averaged 20 points, 8.3 assists per game on a really good Hawks team, 56 and 26. It doesn't sound all that notable, but 56 with its 10th most wins in the shot clock era, and more than any team outside of Philly and Boston. So the Hawks had won 39 games the year before with a pretty similar roster. So this was looked at, hey, well, Lenny Wilkens' numbers improved, this team's wins improved. It seems like a good case. Let's give Lenny Wilkens some love here. But you can make a justifiable cases for Oscar Robertson. He had 29.2 points per game, 9.7 assists per game, 12.3 win shares as the number 2. But Wilkins isn't too fine. Isn't terrible pick as the number 2. The issue was it didn't really matter because nobody was probably going to catch Wilt Chamberlain because he had 20.4 win shares in 1968, averaged 24.3 points per game, 23.8 rebounds per game. And the 76ers went 62 and 20. So it was going to be real tough. But yeah, as I mentioned, so Wilkins gets, that 1968 he finished second. Doesn't do anything until 1973 when he pops up again at 16. And that's it. That's all for Lenny Wilkens' sort of award shares career. So it's the first instance of a guy who just pops up once and really never effectively pops up ever again. And, for that to be your 1 year to be second, that's not bad. But yeah, it's kind of fascinating that he just never ever gets, he doesn't finish fifth another year, eighth another year. He just never finishes in the running ever again. Ever.
Yeah, that's an oddball one. That I remember when I first, this was years ago, kind of digging into the idea of looking, just going through Basketball Reference, looking at who came close to winning MVP, and Wilkins was just sort of it's like, what, obviously another guy who was really good point guard, really good, but never thought of on that level of star who was going to lead his team to a championship or anything like that. But again, it wasn't necessarily a bad choice, but it was just sort of an out of nowhere choice.
Sure.
So 1969, Willis Reed was number 2 to Wes Unseld, and he would win the MVP the following year. He also won the 69 and 70 Sam Davis Awards, and honestly, he seems like a stronger candidate over Unseld in the 69, who was one of the odder MVP choices in history as a rookie, who never, and Unseld himself was never really an MVP candidate seriously again, or even an All-NBA first team. But Reed definitely had the better statistical resume, but Unseld was also All-NBA first team center ahead of Reed, so this was kind of considered the consensus of the time, and the Bullets had a significant win increase from the previous year. So, although the Knicks had improved quite a bit as well with DeBusschere going on there, they obviously were emerging as the team that would win 2 championships. But and as we mentioned, Reed and West in 1970 was basically a toss up as the 2 best players on the 2 teams that met in the finals that year. So Reed probably deserved 2 MVPs, or probably deserved it maybe even more this year than he did in 1970. But I'm not trying to take away from Wes Unseld because they had an interesting year, but this is sort of a trend. Unseld, averaged only 13.8 points per game, 18.2 rebounds. Obviously, it's good, but nothing really that exceptional outside of and maybe just some of the it's the intangible type stuff that the stuff that we give credit for Russell for, guys like Ben Wallace or guys like that who the numbers don't pop off, but you can see the things they do defensively and the screens and stuff like that that usually isn't enough for MVP, but this year it was.
Sure, absolutely. So
someone who is often would be number 1 on this list, but only one time was number 2, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in 1973. And it's worth noting that this is actually the first year that the NBA MVP was different from the Sporting News MVP, which began in 59. Another one of the kind of prominent MVPs of the time, lasted up until, they may still give it out, but it definitely lasted until the early 2010s. So the NBA MVP that year was Dave Cowens, who was he was on the 68 win Celtics. The Sporting News MVP was Tiny Archibald, who led the league in points and assists, and those awards would not differ again until 1984. Kareem probably should have been the MVP that year in 73. He led the league in win shares and PER and pretty much all the other stats that he usually led the league in. And the Bucks won 60 games, so they weren't necessarily that far off from the Celtics, winning 68. It's actually kind of a bit surprising that Kareem only finished second once, because he and McAdoo were definitely kind of 1 and 2 in 75. In 78 and 79, he finished a very distant 4th in voting, but his award shares were very small, underneath 10%. even in those years, he was first in win shares for 48, box score plus minus, and PER. All of those stats, he was number one in both years. His per game averages were down a bit at that point, but he was still top 10 in the league in pretty much everything. So a little bit perplexing, I guess, just because the Lakers didn't have a great amount of team success pre Magic Johnson, that he didn't kind of get the credit that he may have deserved there. But yeah, he definitely, if not winning the MVP, at least was worthy of better consideration than he got definitely in those years.
Yeah, it's strange to look at kind of his history. He either wins the award or he's just like not really in the running all that much, which is weird given that it's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and obviously he won many of them, so it's not that big of a deal. But like you look at his award shares, finishes third his rookie year, then he gets 2 straight, then he finishes second as we said, then he wins another, and then there's like he finishes fifth, and then he wins 2 more, but then he's fourth, wins another, third, 10th, fourth, fifth, and it's just like it's a strange way that it goes, especially some of those 10th in the early 80s or whatever, where it's just strange that he was either in the mix in terms of like he's going to win it and there's no doubt, or like he's not anywhere near the contention or whatever, which is just really strange for a guy of his quality and his level. But there's something to be said for fatigue or some other things, and things could have played into it as well. But yeah, just definitely fascinating to see him not necessarily that much runner up. You would assume that he'd be there a lot more. Move on to another guy who actually has 2 runner ups here, Bob McAdoo, 1974 and 1976. So this is sandwiched between an MVP award in 1975. So 74 he finishes second, 75 he wins it, 76 he finishes second again. Both 74 and 76 were close votes. Kareem won 528 to 451, and then in another year 409 to 393. So McAdoo was right on his tail. 1976 was a very close 3-way race between Cowens as well, because he was in Cowens finished third, Dave Cowens of course. McAdoo, he was close in quality in 1974 but not really in 1976. The Lakers we're also 40 and 42 that season, so it's a little interesting there. And then he kind of falls off. I mean, he's really not in contention really that much else after that. He'd be traded the next season to the Braves, then the Knicks, and remain an effective, lesser player. We talked about him a few weeks ago on the show about sort of the strange career that he's had. And yeah, he bounced around, be in weird situations, deal with injuries, never quite found his footing. He would then, kind of revive his career as the six-man and bench guy in the Showtime Lakers, but he never quite reached that level again. You can see it in the MVP voting too. 1976 or 78, he finishes 10th, and then he's never again in the running, and it sort of fits his career. It's interesting. There's really high highs and then a bunch of lows, and it's kind of inexplicable and weird and strange. But that's unfortunately Bob McAdoo's MVP career. But he got one, but 2 runner-ups as well.
Yeah. So Dave Cowens had the runner-up in 75. It was basically Kareem, Cowens, and McAdoo who were in the running for these awards for a few years there. And he won it in 73. We already talked about that, where it's understandable why he won, but Kareem definitely seemed to have the much better statistical resume. And Cowens also won the Sam Davis Award this year, which was the last time it apparently was awarded, at least the records that we have of it being awarded. And it's a little bit odd choice for him. And McAdoo, he definitely was the number one guy here. Kareem was still worthy, but he was less worthy than usual. He missed a few games, and his numbers were a little bit down. He actually finished 5th. Rick Barry was 4th, also had a strong year, and will definitely tell you he should have been the MVP. And if he caught this postseason, he probably should have been. But regular season award, maybe not quite. Cowens only played in 65 games that year, and his numbers were, good, but nothing super. Kareem actually also played 65 games this year. The Bucks were 33 and 14 without him and finished 38 and 44, so that was part of the reason that he didn't get much consideration. The Celtics, they won 60 games as did the Bullets, and Alvin Hayes who was their best player, probably was 3rd in voting that year. So kind of strange. I mean, it was 2nd place, not the end of the world. And it was clearly McAdoo's year, but the fact that that was one of the stranger ones in terms of that goes. Especially him winning the Sam Davis Award over McAdoo. That is almost inexplicable. That one I have a hard time imagining. I guess that's probably why they retired the award, because once you do that, there's no going back.
There's no going back. Yeah, it's over then. But next guy I want to talk about here is Bill Walton, 1977, and he finished as runner-up in 1977. Walton has the perfect MVP history basically for his career, because he emerges in the conversation during his sophomore year, and then finally when he's healthy he becomes the runner-up, and then he eventually becoes the winner in 1978. It's just like the perfect thing and the perfect storm, and then obviously he's never in there again and completely falls off the face of the earth, and there's never contention ever again. But that's kind of the Bill Walton thing. But we'll focus on 77 though, and that's obviously when Walton and the Blazers became the Cinderella team of the NBA. Walton led the NBA in both rebounds per game and block shots per game that season. He's named to the NBA's all first team, all defensive team, and the NBA's all second team for his regular season accomplishments in the postseason. He led Portland to a sweep of the Los Angeles Lakers in the conference finals, and then went on to help the Blazers, of course, win the NBA title over the favored 76ers despite losing the first games of the series. Walton was also named Finals MVP that year as well. So, as far as the MVP case, though, not really. Kareem did eventually win it, and he finished atop the league, 17.8 win shares, far above even his closest competitor. Artis Gilmore was at 12.2. Kareem was second in the league in scoring that year, just behind Pistol Pete Maravich. I was second in rebounding, just behind Walton, and he tied for first in blocks with Walton as well. So Walton has kind of the gaudy, stats. The win shares aren't quite there, or whatever, but scoring numbers aren't quite there like where it is with the other guys. But yeah, Kareem was definitely a good winner for this year. Walton as a runner-up, there's maybe a case to be made. Definitely gaudy numbers, and more than anything, for a story of the year, definitely Bill Walton and the Portland Trailblazers are definitely that story of the year that you're going to want to kind of look at. For what it's worth, Walton did win the MVP award the next season. He was 12th in win shares that year as well, so he doesn't really jump off the page, in terms of win shares. But to be fair, he got hurt, and he was just about as valuable as you come. They won, the Blazers won 50 of the first 60 games that year before Walton, of course, suffered his broken foot. And then, he won MVP that season. He was a Sporting News NBA MVP as well. He played his only All-Star game that year, and he was named to the NBA's first All-Defensive Team and All-NBA first team as well. So the 1 year he wins, unfortunately, he gets hurt, but it's obviously the value there, with Bill Walton, and the hope is that, hey, whenever when he's healthy, there'll be many more of these to come, and of course, there wasn't. But finished second, in 1977, finished his first 1978, and then never again in the MVP race.
Yeah, that is right, and it's really interesting because the year that he wins, he only plays 58 games, which is by far the least that an MVP's ever won, and it's a voting total. The share of it was only 40%, which is very low for the actual winner because, again, that was a hard decision for the voters, and we'll get into that with the next guy, who's I think a little bit of a surprise to have been a runner-up twice. George Gervin, both in 78 and 79, was the runner-up for MVP, and came very close in 78. Actually, Walton had 96 points and Gervin had 80.5 points, so pretty good there. He played all 82 games to Walton's 58. David Thompson was a distant third, although interestingly, Thompson and Gervin had almost identical statistical seasons. If you look at points per game, and in fact, they famously had their last game of the season where Thompson had 71 points and Gervin had 63 points, so they were dealing for the scoring title. And other stats were right up there where they, you look at the percentages, you look at their advanced stats, you look at kind of everything that they were doing that year. It was almost identical. And like I said, as you talked about with Walton previously, either kind of had a stat case over Walton, and Kareem did as well. But the Walton choice makes sense under circumstances, and Walton might be another one of those guys where some of those numbers don't cap. There's other stats, that might capture him better than that did. 79, Gervin was pretty distant to Moses Malone, where that was his first year. He won the MVP at age 23. The Rockets had improved from 28 to 47 wins, and he emerged as a superstar. And he and Kareem were probably the best choices available. Moses had the better narrative. Gervin had another really good scoring year, but wasn't doing a whole lot other than that, obviously.
Yeah, and that year, you definitely look at that. You look at Moses sort of emerging as a star in the league, and in a league sort of searching for stars this time as some other guys had sort of moved on or whatever. And the league's obviously going through some some interesting times at this time too. And then the Rockets improving as much as they did, almost by 20 wins, 19 wins or whatever. Moses is one of those guys. When you talk about the MVP, a lot of times there are going to be years where maybe if there's like a statistical case for two guys, the guy that's a better story, the guy that's the story of the year will often win it. We look at there's quite a few examples. We'll get to them here in a little bit. And Moses that year is obviously the story. You can give it to Kareem if you want. That's fine, whatever. But it's like you got this fun little story in Moses, and it's kind of a good way to sort of kickstart his superstardom in this case. But obviously things go the way they go. But yeah, it was definitely narrative does drive a lot of these as well. And in this case, it's obvious that when you have two guys that are pretty similar, that the narrative is going to win out.
Yeah, I do think that Gervin gets a little bit lost when we have the discussions about the best shooting guards ever. I know that Gervin, his kind of reputation was that he pretty much scored and really didn't do a whole lot else, but he scored really, really well.
Yeah, right.
He was
if
really
you're very
efficient.
Good at
yeah,
that thing. Then
okay,
that's a talent if you're very good at one thing and elite at it. Yeah, no, I'm definitely with you there.
And the Spurs were a very good team, pretty much his entire career. So that he certainly led them to a lot of team success as well. And it's hard to ask for more than that.
No, absolutely.
So yeah. So next, we have Julius Erving, who finished second in 1980. He had, of course, won 3 MVPs in the ABA. But from 77 to 80, he really didn't have. He kind of had, or excuse me, 77 to 79. He had relatively weak statistical years. He was barely on the fringes of any MVP consideration. Dealt with a lot of nagging injuries and sharing the ball with lots of shoot first players that he was playing with in Philly. Eventually, they traded away those guys and kind of formed a team that better fit his strengths. And from 79 to 80, he improved from a 20.1 to a 25.4 PER, a 1.36 to 2.13 Winchester 48, and a 3.6 to 7.2 box score plus minus. So basically, really dramatic improvements in his in everything that he did, and basically, for the next 3 or 4 years was pretty much at that level. Would finally win the NBA MVP the next season in 81. But it's sort of, and he was a pretty distant second that year for Kareem's final MVP year. That was Kareem really was his last, extremely stout superstar season where he was still really good, still top 10 player for quite a few more years. But in terms of, being MVP quality player, that was really the end there. But great final year for that, his 12th year in the league. Certainly, that's a good run. Absolutely,
definitely,
obviously a good run.
Yeah. Our next guy here, Larry Bird. Interesting enough, and this is a guy when we talked about Kareem a little bit earlier, that he didn't have a ton of runners up, but he felt like he should have always been in the mix. That's kind of what you get with Larry Bird. He finishes second in 81, 82, 83, and then 88. Obviously, he's got award wins in 84, 85, and 86. But yeah, this is basically what you would imagine, like a guy that's always sort of in the mix, doesn't always win it, but at least there's many times where he's either the winner or the runner-up. Bird narrowly lost the 81 MVP, 454 to 423 votes to Julius Erving, as you mentioned. This is the first media vote as well. Voters might have gotten a little ahead of themselves, as Kareem and Moses probably had better cases than Bird. And, there might have been a bias against big men from writers. There might have been other biases, at large, which, not to say that the writers of the time might have saw other things in those 3 players, Kareem, Moses, and Larry Bird. But, it is what it is. The voters also did weird stuff. They gave first place votes to Phil Ford and Kelvin Ramsey, and we see this stuff I think it's a little bit more prevalent in baseball. MVP, you still see it a few times in NBA, and we'll talk about one particular example coming up here in a little bit. But sometimes it's hey, I'm the beat writer for this guy's team, and he gives me good interviews, so I'm gonna vote him number 1. But it's come on, man, you're really screwing everything up. And there's just random dudes that just get one MVP vote, and sometimes it sways the vote and all that sort of stuff. It's don't do that. Just vote for the guys that deserve it. But 1982, Bird lost by 101 votes to Moses, though both he and Erving had pretty strong cases as well. The Rockets were only 46 and 36 at that time, and really the rest of the team wasn't very good either. But I guess it makes sense why Moses won that one. But pretty interesting there. 1983 was Moses' year. He topped Bird 720 to 364. Magic was third. At 304.5. That was his first real significant showing, so Magic sort of emerges as an MVP candidate this year. Bird loses out big to Moses Malone, but obviously would have a little run there because he'd obviously win in 84, 85, and 86, so Bird would get 3 in a row after that. And then he pops up in 1988 again. It's pretty interesting then, and he finishes ahead of Magic in the MVP. He loses again to Michael Jordan this year. Michael Jordan wins the 1988 MVP. Magic's stats were pretty much down across the board from his 1987 MVP season, and he would bounce back until he retired in 1991. But yeah, kind of interesting that Bird finished ahead of Magic at this point, because Bird, you're starting to see, he's still a very good player at this point, but you're starting to see the cracks. You're starting to see, that other guys have gotten better. Obviously, Michael Jordan sort of emerges, and Magic sort of weathers age a little bit better at this point, where Bird's starting to fall off a little bit, but yet Bird still finishes second. And yeah, in the 1988 season, it wasn't really that terrible, though. He was second in PER, third in box plus minus, third in win shares per 48. So, there's some counting stats where he might not have jumped off the page, but this is really his final elite, relatively healthy season for Bird in 1988, and his last little gasp at MVP, relevance. In 1990, he finishes 10th. In 1991, he finishes 9th. And in 1992, he finishes 14th. But those are pretty much legacy awards at that point, particularly the 1992 one as well. But so this is about where you would assume an all-star guy would be, is, always in the running, maybe always runner-up, winner or runner-up a lot of times. But yeah, it fits a little bit more with what I would believe, would be star level. And that's why it was so interesting that Kareem never did have that big run of second-place finishes like Bird did.
Right, yeah, because he had 6 years in a row. Bird did, where he was second or first, yeah. And 7, finishes at first or second in his career, which is up there. I think Jordan and Kareem technically adds more, but that's because he won 6, and only had the one runner-up. Where Bird was kind of a balance of both, and Jordan, I think, is the only other guy who has more combined than they do. But interesting stuff. So. A guy who was not really ever in the MVP conversation except for 1 year, former guest of the program, Bernard King, who was number 2 in 84, one of Larry Bird's first MVP season. And he did have very, very small amount of recognition with the Warriors in 81 and 82, was 14th both years. Then he would go to the Knicks and also get a very low amount of votes, was 16th as he kind of led the Knicks back to a little bit to relevance. And 84, of course, was publicized year. He actually had an even better year in 85. He led the league in scoring at 32.9 points per game and was just, really, really well-rounded player. The issue is that was when he suffered his knee injury and he missed, the end of the season, and that, of course, did him in. I think he was still first team in the league that year, or he had a high All-NBA vote that year despite what he did. But, yeah, he was third in the league in scoring in 84. He was at 12.1 win shares. He was fourth among MVP voters. His win shares for 48 trailed only Adrian Dantley. So, obviously, I think Bird was clearly the superior player as well. They, of course, had their great duel that season. So I don't think, outside the Big Apple, not really too much controversy over this pick. And Bernard King did actually win the Sporting News NBA MVP that year, which was, again, the first year that had differed in about a dozen years. So, and they would begin to differ a little bit more as we go through the rest of this. So, worth noting there. So next we got Magic Johnson, who was second place in 85 and 91. And was a very distant second 85. Bird was very dominant that year in voting. It was 763 to 264. Magic actually had better award shares the previous 2 seasons, despite finishing third in both. So sometimes the rankings don't always tell the story, but it's always difficult to sort of convey the award shares as well. But yeah, he actually got a better share of it the previous seasons. In 91, he was a little bit closer, but not really much. He lost to 891 to 497 to Jordan. I think this was really, obviously 91, I think, was clearly the year where, there was really no more of a dispute of who the best player in the league was. It had clearly been Jordan, where the previous 2 or 3 years it was, pretty much Jordan versus Magic. Some people were thinking Barkley at the time as well, but that was really, they were definitely the top 2, favorites in terms of best player in the league. Maybe with a few holdouts who still, who thought Larry Bird might still be the best. A few racists here and there. But but beyond that, I think that was basically it. So.
I do like that Magic in 1996 when he came back, he finished 12th in MVP voting that year. Which
there you go.
Okay, that's fine. All right, well, guys, that's cool, but no.
Yeah.
Okay, that's whatever. Tied with Charles Barkley that year, as well, in case you're curious.
Yeah. So, yes.
Well, played in 32 games, but that's all right.
Hey, give him a nice, nice little honor for him.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So Dominique Wilkins, another kind of odd choice or out of nowhere choice. I wouldn't say he wasn't deserving here in 86. He finished second to Bird, although he was the only other player to get first place votes that year. He had 5 to Bird's 73. And the Hawks had, gone from 34 to 50 wins the previous season. Wilkins led the league in scoring, 30.3 points per game. So, he probably shouldn't have finished ahead of Magic Johnson, but not like it wasn't undefensible. They were a really good team that year. He actually had an even stronger season in 87, but only finished 5th in the league in MVP voting that year. So another guy who was a little bit one-dimensional in terms of really being a great scorer and not necessarily doing a whole lot of playmaking or other defense or other things. But that one dimension that he had was absolutely incredible at. So.
For sure, yeah, and his award shares are kind of interesting because he obviously, as you mentioned, finished second in 1986, 87 fifth, 88 sixth, 1991 eighth, 93 fifth, and really though I don't really argue with that all that much. That's kind of where Dominique Wilkins should kind of be. He was, as you said, he was very good at one thing, and there's so many other talents in the league right now that are a little bit better and a little bit more well-rounded. So that's about where you think he would finish, but still it comes in second in 1986. So at least he got pretty close in that year. And yeah, it's not like he didn't deserve it as well. There's a lot of really good narrative around that too, of the Hawks improving, him leading the league in scoring, and him kind of emerging as their leader or whatever. So it definitely makes sense that he would get to that level as well. So not totally out of the realm of possibility, but yeah, just interesting MVP career for Dominic.
Yeah, similar reasoning for the Bernard King.
Yeah, right.
84, pretty much the same kind of thing. So a guy who was usually finished first, but he also finished second 3 times, Michael Jordan. In 87, 89, and 97 finished second. It's worth noting that the other MVPs disagreed with this. He won the Sporting News and Basketball Digest MVPs in 89 and in 97. This was over Magic and over Karl Malone. Although in 93, both publications went with Charles Barkley, so they did not agree with him in. He actually finished third in 93, but still, they did choose Barkley there. So that was the only time where Jordan, didn't get the MVP there. I'm not sure. I don't have 87 in front of me to see who was chosen for that. Let me pull it up for a minute. So yeah, 87. Magic was the Sporting News MVP as well, and Basketball Digest also went with Magic. So Magic got the sweep that year,
sweep, yeah,
which makes sense. Yes, but nevertheless, so yeah, obviously, if you combine the 6 MVPs and the 3 second place finishers, I think he has the most of anybody when you combine those two things. And we talked about the 97 race before, where it was pretty much tossed up between him and Malone in both 97 and 98. Both were definitely pretty worthy. I don't blame anyone who would say Jordan should win it over Malone, but Karl got his one. I guess he ended up getting 2 once Jordan was retired, but nevertheless, it was fine pretty much either way.
No, absolutely. And Jordan's MVP, career is pretty interesting too. Obviously he comes in 87, he comes in second, as we mentioned. 88, he kind of wins it, which is pretty early in his career that he's already kind of winning this, but it makes sense. He's emerging as, a dominant player. And then he pretty much is always in the conversation then the rest of his career. 88, he wins it. 89, he's second. 90, he's third. 91, he wins it. 92, he wins it. 93, he's third again. He retires, comes back in 95, still finishes 11th. And then wins it in 96, second in 97, then wins it again in 98. So pretty much in the conversation, pretty much from 1988 until 1998. So pretty much for 10 years in the conversation every single time. Finishes no less in a full season than third is his worst finish in any of those years. And it's hard to argue that. I mean, it's Michael Jordan, also good. Joins Bill Russell in the very good career category.
Yeah, well, if nothing else, we've said of those things, so that's good today. Charles Barkley, 1990. This is a really infamously close MVP race. We discussed it before. Barkley had the most first place votes, but finished second to Magic. The point total was 636 to 614, and Jordan was third with 564 points. The reason kind of behind this is interesting because Barkley wasn't necessarily the Six had gradually improved. They were 53 wins in 90. They were 46 the year before and 36 the year before that. So, he didn't really individually improve significantly either, but yet, I guess the steady win improvement helped, and the idea that he had matured. He actually did win the Sporting News MVP this year. Basketball Digest picked Patrick Ewing of all people, who was 5th in the MVP vote. And Ewing did have a good year, but it was sort of just that was a little bit out of nowhere that he won that one. It is interesting. I found a Chicago Tribune article that the headline was something like, how could Michael Jordan have finished third in the MVP voting? And it quoted Sean Powell, who was a Miami Herald sports writer at the time, as now with NBA.com. And he said, I think Michael has bought us to death, put us asleep in a way. And he voted Barkley first, Jordan second, and Magic third. He said, I really wrestled with it because I saw it as more of a personal preference than, is this guy better than that guy? I mean, who in their right mind can say that Barkley is better than Jordan? I voted for Charles because I think he had grown as a player, passing, scoring, rebounding, and during the regular season, I think he grew as a person, being more civil to his teammates. And then he refers to an incident during the playoffs, I think it was when it happened, where he had yelled at Mike Kaminsky and told them to get this guy out of here, and it kind of come unglued during the playoff series against the Bulls. So that kind of undercut that. Of course, by then the voting had happened, and they said, this is for the regular season. If it's for the playoffs, Michael is unanimous choice. So I think that was interesting, not surprising necessarily, but interesting insight from a voter during that time, and probably kind of gave the consensus there as like, we kind of want somebody different. Barkley has shown
Jordan is
some maturity
good.
Here. So
he's too good. Right. He's boring. We're done with it. Over.
Yeah, and really, Magic was the guy who was winning them at this point. Jordan had only won the one in 88. Magic had won it in 87 and 89. This was his third
it's not like he had 6 in a row, and it's like, oh, this is getting boring. Let's put another guy in there. It's like, well, I mean, geez, he's only won one. Like, he's only been in the race for like 3 years. Like, that's maybe I get bored of him quite yet.
Barkley was
1990. You're bored of Michael Jordan. I have a unfortunate thing for Sean Powell is he'd be bored for about 10 more years.
So I mean, this was the first year that Barkley was, a serious candidate for it. He'd gotten some votes in previous years, but this was the first year that it was like he was the new guy in the MVP-ish type club. So.
Yeah, which is interesting, though, because obviously, and I guess it sort of matches with Barkley's peak as well, but he doesn't really emerge all that much. I mean, second in 1990, he falls back to fourth in 91, falls all the way to 12th in 1992, then 93 goes to Phoenix. Obviously they go on a huge run. He wins the MVP that year. Then he doesn't really ever come back again, which is sort of about where you'd put it. In 94, he's 10th. 95, he's 6th. And then by 96 and 97, he's just getting votes because he's Charles Barkley. Anybody who voted him in 1997 should probably get. But I mean, it was like he got like 0.0002% or so. It's like, see, he was completely irrelevant at 16th. But yeah, pretty much only relevancy up until about 1993. But yeah, this is a little peak here where you get about 5 years where he's in the mix, and then he completely falls off and drops away. Clyde Drexler, 1992. Yeah, this is really an interesting one because he has we talk about MVP award histories and award shares and whatnot. He floats around for a while, Clyde Drexler. He's always kind of in the mix, never really quite up there until 1992 when he his age 29 season. That's when he finishes second. He had received consideration like the 4 prior seasons, but only really been top 5 once when he finished 1992. In 1992, he finished the second. This is his first time on the All-NBA first team as well. So this was a year where he definitely broke out. It wasn't like just out of nowhere MVP voters decided, this year Clyde Drexler. Like, he had gotten better. I mean, this is his peak year was this year, so it's kind of interesting to see the voting obviously reflect that. He finishes second to Jordan, despite better cases probably being made for guys like Karl Malone, David Robinson, John Stockton, Patrick Ewing, but the Blazers were a great team that year, and Drexler, of course, because he had hung around for so long, kind of a good story as well to kind of put him up there. I mean, the Blazers, as I said, great team, 57-25. They eventually meet MVP winner Michael Jordan and the Bulls in the NBA Finals, and you know how that goes. Jordan, the Bulls went on, of course, to win their second consecutive title. In the 6-game series, though, Drexler, he averages 24.8 points, 7.8 rebounds, and 5.3 assists per game. So again, like, it's not like he doesn't deserve it. He's a great player at this point. He's leading a really good Blazers team, so he definitely should be in the mix. As far as where his history would go after this, he'd be in top 15 in MVP voting for 2 more seasons, 92 and 95, but then pretty much fall out after that. But yeah, so it's kind of interesting if you go over his history. So 85, he's second, or 22nd, I should say. 88, he's 5th. 90, he's 12th. 91, he's 6th. 92, he's 2nd, so he pops up again, and then he just kind of falls off again. 93, 10th, 14th in 1995. So he's got the few little years where he pops up, few years where he's doing okay, and then obviously the year where he finishes second, but not really, doesn't have an overwhelming case that he should have absolutely won that year, but still kind of cool that he got one runner up in there.
Yeah, and not too far off from the other, although Drexler led his team to, I think he was a more complete player and led his team to better success than like Wilkins or King did, but it was kind of a similar thing where he's a great scorer, he deserves some credit. This was the second year they'd won, they'd gone to the finals, it ended up being that team, so they'd been in the top tier for for 3 or 4 years, kind of emerging, battling with the Lakers for conference finals and that kind of thing. So moving on to 1993, Hakeem Olajuwon, and it's interesting that he was kind of all over the map when it came to voting. He had top 5 showings in 86 and 89, so some significant support there, like around the 20% mark in award shares, but very little support in 87, 88, and 90 through 92, although he had pretty much similar production almost every season during that time. We talked previously on how he and the Rockets kind of had some rough times between that finals appearance and the mid 1990s. So it was his reputation was very different than it later became once he started winning championships. But in '93, he did have career highs in PER, in true shooting percentage, and boxer plus minus in points per game, and the Rockets, probably more importantly for the award, improved from 42 to 55 wins in his first year under Rudy T. And although it's not relevant for MVP, they advanced to the second round for the first time since '87. So, obviously they were the voters not know this at the time, but they were about to emerge, as a championship team back to back after, so they were definitely on the rise at this point, and that obviously had an influence on him getting that second place finish and eventually becoming MVP the next year.
Yeah, and the kind of the award flows with basically what his career would kind of be. The real highs there in 1986, he's 4th, and then there's the time where he's 7th, and 1991 he's 18th or whatever. And this is it meshes well with Hakeem's career. And there was a lot of questions about Hakeem and questions about the Rockets and whether this guy's a leader. And then by 93, like you said, it starts popping up again. There in 94, he wins the award, and then obviously they're a title team now. So it's kind of interesting to see it kind of flow that way. And then quickly then thereafter in the conversation for a few more years, 95, 96, 97, and then by 1999 he's completely out of it. And 98 he's done and never gets any more awards there. But yeah, pretty cool to see kind of 2 different peaks there with Hakeem, which sort of matches with how his career went as well, with the 2 different peaks where you have the early peak of his career, then kind of a valley there for a while, and then the Rockets then emerge under Rudy Tomjanovich and a few other guys and really become a title team. So it's pretty cool to see it kind of match his career in that way.
Yeah, for sure. So, and speaking of 94, David Robinson finished second in MVP. He won the Basketball Digest Award 94, but finished second to Hakeem, both an MVP and Defensive Player of the Year award. Both Hakeem and Robinson were very close to traditional stats, but Robinson's advanced metrics, for whatever reason, were much better as they generally were throughout their careers. Of course, the Admiral did win the MVP in 95. Hakeem finished fifth that year, but infamously lost the playoff series in Dream. Outdueled him in that series. There's a lot of video, of course, of Hakeem embarrassing Robinson in that series. Robinson then bounced back, was a distant second to Jordan in 96, but 72-10 record will do that. And Penny Hardaway, Hakeem Olajuwon, and Karl Malone all somehow got first place of votes that year. If there was any year where you were going to have an undisputed MVP, that probably would have been a strong year for Jordan to do. But Robinson, despite not having a first place vote, was second ahead of all those guys. So, fun fact.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very fun.
Yeah.
We're nothing if not a treasure trove of fun facts on the show. So.
Yeah. And he was a generally a serious candidate. He was third in 91 and 92, in MVP. The other years he was kind of a marginal candidate. Toward the end of his career, like 99 and 01, he popped up, but really, only was 12th in 99, was 10th in 2001. So not a serious candidate by any point. 96 was really the last year where he was, after he got hurt, he was not quite the same player. And of course, Tim was playing with Tim Duncan, so they were going to share the credit for their accomplishments there.
All right, our next guy here is Shaquille O'Neal, 1995 and 2005. This is interesting here. I think this is the first case of we have a Jordan who had a pretty big gap. It's a 10-year gap between second place finishes for Shaquille O'Neal, but it fits pretty well. I mean, that's kind of how the Shaq's career went. He wins the Basketball Digest Award in 1995 and the Sporting News MVP in 2005. So he's got cases in both those years, and obviously comes home with some hardware in both those years as well, even if he doesn't win the true MVP one. But Shaq, similar to Hakeem, who we mentioned a little bit earlier, some odds, peaks, and valleys when it comes to MVP placement. He won it in 2000, and he had strong consideration in 94, 98, 2001, and 2002. But otherwise, he's pretty much on the fringes or an afterthought. He dealt with injuries, of course, in 96 and 97, and then in the early 2000s, he's kind of trying to find his footing with the Lakers and whatnot, and after having the peak with Kobe Shaq years, and there's kind of those weird lean years, and then obviously there's the Miami stretch as well. But 2005 is an interesting one. I'll start with 1995. He led the league in scoring in 1995, but his rival David Robinson won the MVP without much dispute at the time. I mean, David Robinson should have won the MVP that year, and despite whatever Hakeem Olajuwon wants to say, it was a great award for David Robinson, and he absolutely should have won it that year. But Shaq, emerges from that point in 1995, and he looks like a definite contender to be in the award for a while. But interestingly enough, he doesn't really get there right away. Because, in 1996 he finishes ninth, 1997 he finishes ninth, as we said. 1998 he's starting to get back, within the swing of things, but he finishes fourth. 1999 he's sixth, and it wasn't until 2000 that he would eventually win the one. We get all the way to 2005, though. So you got, again, I'll just kind of go over the history real quick because I think it gives a nice little context. 2001 he's third, 2002 he's third, 2003 he's fifth, 2004 he's sixth, and then in 2005 he gets the second again. Pretty contentious debate, though, because you got Shaq, Nash, Dirk, Duncan, and LeBron. And LeBron finishes sixth. He's only 20 at this point, too, which is just nuts. But they have excellent seasons. Shaq and Nash were the clear frontrunners, taking all but 4 of the first-place votes. And Nash actually won by a narrow 34-point margin. Shaq had been pretty vocal about believing that he should have won both of Nash's MVPs. I'm not sure about that. Maybe this one he's got a pretty good case, but really Dirk has a better case than both of them. Tim Duncan might have a better case as well, and LeBron has an incredible case this year. Even though he doesn't get a first place vote, he definitely has a case as well. So despite the fact that Shaq is very upset about this award and the other MVP award, like, there's cases for other guys. Yeah, he maybe should have won this one, but I think that Dirk was definitely a great candidate, and I think Nash was a pretty good candidate too. But Shaq definitely has a case in this year in 2005. And then, of course, he would never really be in the mix again. In 2007, he would have finished 12th, but then, that was kind of the peak for Miami Shaq, and of course, he didn't win any MVP consideration as Cavs or Celtics Shaq, so or Suns Shaq. But it's pretty interesting there. Are you kind of surprised that he only won one MVP, Shaquille O'Neal? Like, it felt like he was more dominant, but I don't know. It's weird. He kind of came in a weird time where the old guys were still reigning with Malone and Jordan or whatnot, and then when those guys retired, he had some issues and couldn't quite get to that level again. But he was like the most dominant player for a few years. It's just very interesting that he didn't win a few more. Yeah,
I think there's a maybe unfair, but the thought that he underachieved in his career. Whether it was he didn't stay in shape or he didn't always take basketball seriously or what have you. I mean, he was obviously incredible at his peak. He probably, I think 05, either way, it's pretty much a toss-up. I think Shaq could have been the winner, but he definitely didn't absolutely need to be. And yeah, honestly, like there are a lot of years where he played like 60, 65 games, and if he'd played 75 to 80 games, he probably would have been MVP. But just because like 98, for instance, where he was really really good. Well, Jordan was probably winning it that year, but nevertheless, I mean, he would have had a better showing that year, and the 01-02 where the Lakers are winning championships, and absolutely, of course, the peak both of that team and individually. Like if he had played full seasons, he probably would have been MVP over Duncan or Garnett or whomever, but because he only played 70% of the season, he just didn't quite get it. So I think that probably has more to do with it than anything else. Interesting that MVP comes right at the midpoint of the two second place finishes. It's sort of a nice little nice little parallel thing going on there.
Sandwich. Nice little sandwich for old Shaq.
Exactly, yeah, very good.
Which I'm sure he would eat and enjoy.
So, probably. Well, sandwiches are good, so I understand.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and pro sandwiches as well. So.
Yeah, there you go. Well, that's good. I'm glad we're both pro sandwiches. We wouldn't want to get into like a fight on the internet about we don't need to get. We definitely. I refuse to ever get into a debate on the show about what constitutes a sandwich.
Oh no, please, yeah, let's please never do that, because that always kind of irks me. I don't know why. I get like irrationally upset about that. There's somebody.
I don't know.
Let's
it's very strange. But anyway, all right. So moving on, Karl Malone, 98 was finished second to Jordan in between his two MVP years that he won in 97 and 99. He did get significant support in 89 and 95 was third in 89 and was third also in 95. He had 50% award share that year. It was kind of a fringe candidate more in 90 and 92, but got like about 25% of the votes those years, 25% award shares those years. So other than that, didn't really have serious consideration. Until the late 90s, when he went on his 1-2-1 streak of MVPs and his runner-up. But I don't know much more than that, because we talked kind of a lot about the award race between Malone and Jordan during the time already. But that's I guess. Something that was sort of special about him is that he really, he was so exceptional, once he was past, once when he was in mid to late 30s, that he just had that, he had a really, really good career early on, and, but a lot of guys fall off and, aren't particular, he was, like Elgin Baylor level career, maybe his first 10 years or so, and then he maintained that greatness and even got kind of better when he was in his late 30s, which is why he's so had such an exceptional career.
Yeah, and I think what's really cool too is in 1988 he finishes 8th in MVP voting, and then he would be in the top 10 until 2001, which is just nuts. Like that's a long run. Like that's a huge run of always being in the top 10. Like you don't always win it, you're not always the runner up, but top 10 every single one of those times, and that's a hell of a legacy there, hell of a run. Just to stay healthy those years, because there's like a year where you get hurt and you finish the 15th or whatever. No, he's healthy every year and finishes in the top 10 every year. So definitely one there. Let's move on to Alonzo Mourning here. 1999 he finishes second. There's really 2 years about Alonzo that are going to stand out, but let's kind of circle back. He joins the leagues in 1992, doesn't get his first taste of MVP consideration until about 1996 when he finishes 14th as a member of the Heat, so really didn't get much as a Hornet. Starts getting some as a Heat. He'd be in the conversation for 4 out of the next 5 years. I finished 12th in 1997, before finally coming up to a runner-up in 1999. In 99, he really does have a case, but doesn't really stand out or seem like an egregious runner-up. He finished with 7.9 win shares. He was 6th among the MVP finishers in that. Eventual MVP winner was, of course, Karl Malone. We talked about that already. A lot of Karl Malone talk going on here, and there's really some controversy over this pick, mainly due to Malone having being kind of a boring pick and not having one of his best statistical seasons. If you go to any articles and look up worst MVP votes, or this one comes up all the time, and it's like Alonzo Mourning did this and Alonzo Mourning did that, and Malone's boring. It's like, yeah, but Malone's still very good. Like, yes, it was one of his worst statistical seasons, but it's still a very good season because it's Karl Malone. So kind of interesting in that. You always see Malone then finished third the following year and arguably had a better year than it was before, but it was really Shaq's award to lose at that point, and he had all but one first-place vote, and that one first-place vote was for Allen Iverson, despite the fact that year Allen Iverson had the lowest win shares of any MVP finisher, and he only got a single vote. He got one vote, and it was a first-place vote, so not great, but that's it. And for Zoe, 96 he's 14th, 97 he's 12th, 99 he's 2nd, 2000 he's 3rd, and then that's it for Alonzo, and of course there was the issues with his health and whatnot, but yeah, the fact that it took him quite a while to get into the conversation, he's there for a few years, and then he's out of it really quickly is kind of the Malone or the Mourning legacy there.
So next we got Kevin Garnett, who's was second place in 2000 and 2003. 2000, he was a very distant second. Of course, that was Shaq's most dominant year. Interesting that this was the year that he got in that conversation, because really he was pretty much a similar player the year before, but was not really in the conversation at all. Was 10th, and this year was the second. But he did show some modest improvements. He was at 23 at this point and was on the All-NBA first team for the first time. In 2003, it was a stronger second place showing. A fairly close vote, 962 to 871, finishing second to Tim Duncan in 2003. Although he was the Basketball Digest Player of the Year, which is the last year that award was apparently awarded. So he managed to get that one. He would have, of course, become the MVP in the next year in 2004.
Yeah, we'll move on to Tim Duncan here. He's kind of a boring MVP career. Finishes second in 2001, second in 2004, but he wins in 2002 and 2003. Yeah, that's it's 2001 was kind of controversial though, because Iverson wins the MVP award that year. Duncan was a distant second at 1,121 votes for Iverson to 706 for Duncan. But I mean, you can look at the numbers, and there's really good case for Duncan that year. But we talk about narratives sometimes, and that was kind of the Allen Iverson narrative year. Makes all the sense in the world that he would win, and even if statistically he might not be at that same level that Duncan was, but you know what? One's a sexier story than, and Tim Duncan's never going to be the sexier story no matter what, unfortunately. But that's all right. I mean, I guess he was a sexy story his first few years in the league, and then he became a not sexy story. But Iverson was sexy that year, so we're going to go with that. But after Duncan won his MVP awards in 2002 and 2003, he was a distant runner-up in 2004 to Garnett, and it was a really weird MVP year. If you look at this, it's one that's definitely the most 2004 you could possibly have an award, because Jermaine O'Neal and Peja Stojakovic were number 3 and number 4, and they each got first place votes. Can you imagine Jermaine O'Neal, your NBA MVP, or Peja Stojakovic? You know, you get your little ballot and you say, you know what, Peja's the man. He's first place. But you know, at that time, it wasn't that crazy. They were very, very good players. It's just they
were excellent. Peja especially was really he'd really picked it up that year. He had a year or two where he was like absolutely fantastic, and then kind of fell off a little bit. Was still obviously a great 3-point shooter and everything, but he kind of was a little bit looked like he might really like kind of delve into superstardom, and it didn't quite ever happen there. I guess O'Neal was kind of the same way as well. I mean, still both really good players for their teams, and they had good teams. But yeah, that is, in retrospect, the fact neither one of those guys ever kind of were that level ever again. So interesting stuff. So moving on to Jason Kidd was second place in 2002, which really only his significant year of MVP support. He was 5th in 99. Other than that, he was never really was better than 8th for any of the rest of his career. It was a pretty close race that year, 954 to 897, losing to Duncan. The Nets had improved from 26-52 wins, so another case where that drove the where that idea drove this support, and definitely he brought some energy to that team. They made the finals a couple years in a row, so certainly not was certainly not undeserving of it. I can't think of anybody else who was particularly more deserving of it, but it was was the one year where he merited that consideration. Not too far off, honestly, from the Lenny Wilkens year. I never really thought about that parallel, but that totally makes a lot of sense to me. I think in some respects that was a very similar type of a award for him. He obviously was in at least got MVP votes in other years, but yeah, as far as kind of historical precedent, that's actually a pretty good one.
Absolutely. Next guy here is LeBron James, pretty good player as well. 2006, 2014, he finished second. Of course, he's got wins in 2009. He's got a win in 2010. He's got a win in 2012. He's got a win in 2013. And there's cases to be made for some other years as well. But what's interesting though is in 2006, he shares the Sporting News MVP award with Steve Nash, which is incredible given his age. And we talked about it a little bit earlier of just how young he was and how good he was and how much of a case he had for actual NBA MVP, despite not getting any first place votes. But yeah, to get the Sporting News MVP or to share it with Nash is definitely an accomplishment. And that was Nash's second MVP award and whatnot. But LeBron had already made a leap into the elite by that point. He led the NBA in box plus minus. He was second in PR, second in win shares. And then he obviously goes through the next few years, which are peak LeBron, and LeBron is amazing and great. By 2014, though, it's really his last year of true MVP contendership. He loses to Kevin Durant, and he's become more of a periphery candidate at this point. Like, there was a real case to me for kind of half the year, a few years ago, if I remember, even last year. And I remember even this year, there was like, for the first 2 months, people were like, oh, I don't know, LeBron James in the MVP conversation. But given kind of the amount of time he's had on his body, like, it makes a lot of sense for him just kind of pull up, for the last few months of the year and then get ready for the playoffs. There's no need to kill yourself to try to win an MVP. He's already proven that he's a pretty good player. Probably doesn't need any more MVP awards. So it's kind of interesting to see that, it always kind of pops up here for a few months and then he sort of slows down and that's about what it should be. And that's probably the smart move. Yeah, he could have racked up a few more MVPs here if he really went and killed himself, but he's gotten the NBA Finals, as many years he's gotten in a row. So he's probably making the right choice by not chasing, MVP awards or chasing, individual accolades anymore. But yeah, great run there and finishes second 2006 and 2014.
Yeah. So next we got Steve Nash in 2007, which was the year after his 2 MVP awards, where he still came relatively close to winning the MVP in that year. The Suns, despite dealing with injuries, despite, dealing with some roster changes and stuff like that, they still maintained being a fantastic team. They were still number 1 offense in the league. And, we know, of course, his story, but, the MVP trajectory is still pretty fun. He was kind of a marginal player with the Suns and early on with the Mavericks before, he picked things up with Dirk coming along under Don Nelson's run and gun system and totally transformed a franchise in his career when he went to Phoenix. And, after winning his 2 MVPs, finishing second, he actually never made the top 10. Again, he kind of fell off of there despite, being an excellent player for another 4 or 5 years. And yeah, 2007 actually probably his best statistical year. He was his best win shares year, although he did trail Dirk, who won the MVP, as well as Kobe, Duncan, and LeBron in win shares, but got 44 first place votes. So interesting stuff there.
Yeah, definitely. Next guy we'll go on to, this is kind of the current guy, so it's not very exciting to be like, hey, here, let's break down Chris Paul's things. That's why we're kind of going through these fast. But speaking of Chris Paul, 2008, first time he got MVP votes, he was second, and he hasn't topped or matched that since. So that kind of stinks. But yeah, so 2008 is first time he pops up on the list. He's second, and then after that, he's 5th, he's 13th, he's 3rd, he's 4th, he's 7th, he's 6th, he's 6th, and he's probably not going to be in the top 2 anytime soon. I mean, maybe, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say probably not. I see some support in 2012 and 2013 as the Clippers kind of evolve into a winning team once he arrived, but that was about it. 2012 he finishes 3rd. 2013 he's 4th, but that's kind of it for Chris Paul. But yeah, it kind of stinks of the first year, which was a great year. I mean, an amazing year for him and for the franchise and for getting the Hornets into the playoffs and whatnot. But kind of falls off from that point and is never really in the consideration again. And like I said, probably will never be in the conversation again. So
right. Next we have Kobe Bryant, 2009. Didn't really get serious MVP consideration until 2003. Was 3rd that year. Actually, a little bit later than I would have guessed. And was kind of a peripheral candidate in 06 and 07. He was 4th and 3rd both those years before breaking through in 2008, winning the MVP. Of course, when the Lakers made the Pau Gasol trade and left in contention again. And he had a pretty similarly stout year in 09, but he did lose to LeBron in every major statistical category. And the Cavs went from 45 to 66 wins that year. So that was LeBron's, LeBron already could have won MVP before then, but by then there was absolutely no denying LeBron that he was the best player in the league, for sure. So a lot of people kind of, sort of like, oh, Kobe only won one MVP, but honestly, in his career, he played, he played during Duncan's career, during Shaq's career, during Garnett's career, during LeBron's career, during all those guys. It's one MVP is a decent accomplishment. I mean,
you're gonna get people very upset. Jason, the Lakers fans are mobilizing right now for your hot take here on this, but no, it's
all right. Well,
but
fair
you're right, and it's that's not lie. But anyway, it is what it is. But all right, we'll move on. Kevin Durant here. I think is this no, not our last guy. We got a few more guys here. But Kevin Durant, 2010, 2012, 2013, 2 straight years second before finally winning it. Of course, his first taste of MVP contention saw him vault all the way to second in 2010. So that's kind of interesting. Is that he's never getting votes. He's never in the top 15. Never in the first time he's there. He's second in 2010. Which is pretty interesting. I kind of forgot that he was as good as he was that year. But it was a breakout. I mean, he made his first All-Star game, which is quite the year to make your first All-Star game, runner-up in MVP. Leads the league in scoring at 30.1 points per game. And he was only 21 years old at this point. So incredible year. I really kind of forget this one. It's kind of a lost one to history because I kind of think of his peak as then the years we're going to talk about here in a little bit. 2012, he once again lead the league in scoring at a mere 28 points per game. And his team had a surprise run of the NBA Finals. And this time, he finished 3rd in win shares that year behind only Chris Paul and LeBron James in 2012. And then back-to-back second-place finishes. LeBron won it again, in 2013. But Durant had his best season to date. He was 18.9 win shares, but it wasn't enough, of course, to eclipse LeBron, who was on another level at 19.3 and definitely a worthy candidate. What's interesting about this year, though, is Durant finishes second but doesn't receive a single first-place vote. And LeBron would have been a consensus if not for one lone first-place vote for Carmelo Anthony. So that's, I'll okay, that's fine. But Durant's team this year fell to the Grizzlies in a second-round upset, and this is the year, obviously, that Westbrook got injured and all that other stuff that sort of happened. I think, is that the year? Yeah, that's the year that Westbrook got injured, right? Or did they just lose? Yeah, I forget if that was the year that they just lost. But
Westbrook got hurt.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, that was that year. And then the next year after that, so we're talking about 2013, I finished second. 2014, Durant would finally win an MVP, 2 straight second-place finishes, and he really deserved it, 19.2 win shares, and he got 119 first-place votes. So he definitely did deserve it that year. And now, given the kind of the path that his career has gone, he's probably not going to be in the running ever again, and that's not, but he's going to win a lot of titles probably. So, you give up, MVP awards for championships. So
yeah, so. A guy who it's kind of hard to believe now was ever in the MVP conversation, Dwight Howard, who was second to Derrick Rose in what was probably his best season, 22.9 points per game, 14.1 rebounds per game, won another Defensive Player of the Year award. Turned out would be his second to last year with the Magic, and of course he's bounced around the league ever since. I remember feeling like this was like a pretty close call between Rose, Howard, and LeBron at the time, but Rose actually won it pretty handily. He had 113 first place votes. Dwight only had 3, and LeBron only had 4, and almost double Dwight's vote total or point total. So, yeah, that was honestly, yeah, that was pretty unanimous decision, or not quite unanimous, but close enough at the time. Pretty dominant decision at the time. Yeah, and Dwight, he did have a couple of fourth-place finishes the year before, so he was kind of a fringe MVP candidate, but never really got there, and then immediately pretty much fell off, after that. So, and then we have James Harden, who a lot of people have fought about his second-place finishes to Steph Curry in 2015 and to Russell Westbrook in 2017. He did win the Players' Voice Award MVP from the Players Association in 2015. I would argue Steph was superior, but it was definitely a close race there. 2017 to Russell Westbrook, also a close race, but there was no Players' Voice Award MVP consolation prize. What's interesting to me is if you look statistically at the difference between the 3 years between 2015, 2016, 2017, the 2016 year being where he was not at all on the MVP radar because the Rockets were disappointing that year, basically equal, production there. Slightly less in 2016. He was 8th in PER that year and 4th in value of replacement player. True shooting percentage was almost exactly the same, and scoring, rebounds, and assists outside of 2017 when the assists were up a lot because of D'Antoni's system. All that was pretty close to the same. So interesting that the perception was so different despite the stats, production there being, very, very close to, similarity.
Yeah, definitely. And our final guy now, Kawhi Leonard, 2016, he finishes second. I finished well behind Steph Curry, who was the first unanimous first-place MVP winner in NBA history. So, I mean, it's tough to argue, too. I mean, he definitely deserved it that year as well. But Kawhi that year was the best player on a 67-win Spurs team at only age 24. So kind of cool how he kind of emerged there. Just a little bit of his background. 2015, he finishes 10th. 2016, he finishes second. And then last year, he finishes third. And he was a fringe candidate last year. People did mention him, but it felt like it was never really his race. It felt like it was Westbrook and Harden. But, there were some, people that were like, hey, what about Kawhi? What about Kawhi? But it never really quite felt that way. And then obviously this year, I do not think he's going to get any votes. I could be wrong, but, his 5 mediocre games that he played, I don't think that he should get any. If he gets them, then we'll have to talk to that guy. But, I don't know that he's done, we have no idea what the history is with Kawhi Leonard. He's still very young or whatever. But, he emerges pretty quickly to come into second, finishes third the year after that. And we hope that now, he can get back there in the future. But, time will tell on that.
Time will tell, indeed. So, all right, Rich. Well, thanks for doing this. Always a lot of fun. A good discussion about MVP voting, and hopefully the listeners enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I enjoyed this a lot.
So thanks, everyone, for checking us out. You can find us at the Step Back at fansided.com. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, or pretty much anywhere you listen to your podcasts. And you can also find us on Twitter and Facebook at Over and Back NBA. So thanks for listening, and we'll be back again soon.